Chapter 1. The Gathering Night. A single torch burned by the arched gateway of Aurelia's western district, sputtering in the damp air. It cast restless shadows along the high walls as if they too were uneasy about what the night might bring. Recent murders had made the streets grow quiet after sunset. Even dogs refused to howl. A hush lay over the city-state, one that weighed down on everyone's shoulders, from the poorest servant to the wealthiest noble. Sirene slipped through an alley with predatory grace, the edge of her long coat brushing the cobblestones. She'd never liked working in the city. In the countryside or open wilderness, one could sense approaching evil in the rustle of trees or the sudden silence of nocturnal creatures. But here, malevolence mingled with the haze of guttering torches, and the stench of refuse masked any clear sign of demonic presence. She could only rely on her instincts, sharpened through a decade of hunting. Tonight, those instincts screamed that something far darker than the usual vampire nest was prowling Aurelia's claustrophobic streets. At 25 years old, Sirene had grown into the role of demon hunter with a ruthless, unflinching resolve. A pair of short swords strapped across her back provided quick dispatch for lesser undead. Her most potent weapon, however, was the glass vial of purified ether tucked into the belt at her waist, potent enough to stun or burn lesser fiends. Her mentor, Calder, had once taught her that demons feared purity more than steel. Now Calder was leagues away, if he was even alive, while Sirene followed the trail of grisly murders that had begun 2 nights earlier. Rounding a corner, she caught a glimpse of flickering lamplight. A cluster of city guards stood around something in the middle of the street, their bronze helmets reflecting a wavering glow. She moved in silently and stopped just beyond the reach of their torches. The men muttered among themselves. "How in the gods' names did this happen?" asked one guard, his voice faintly trembling. "Same as the last," another replied, stooping to inspect the remains. "Some creature. We found the body practically split open, drained." Sirene forced herself to step closer, ignoring the sour taste rising in her throat. She'd seen hundreds of bodies left in the wake of monstrous hunts, but it never got easier. The guard turned sharply, startled by her sudden presence. "Who the hell?" he began. "I'm here to help," she cut him off, her tone cold as iron. She swept the scene with practiced eyes. A body lay face down in a pool of darkened blood, the chest cavity torn open. Patches of skin seemed melted, as though some corrosive substance had burned through it. She crouched near the corpse and pressed her palm to the wet stone, focusing on a sense of lingering energy. If it was a vampire, there'd be a faint necromantic tinge. If a lesser demon, often an acrid smell of sulfur. But what she felt was wrong. A pulse of something ancient and hungry, like a negative imprint stamped onto the ground. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled. She whispered, "This isn't a normal feeding. It's like it was devoured from the inside out." The guard who'd spoken first eyed her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "People say you hunt demons. Is that—" "This is worse," she said flatly, rising to her feet. "I need to see all the victims, not just this one." He hesitated but eventually nodded. "There's a makeshift morgue at the old textile warehouse near the city square. They've brought the bodies there." She gave a curt nod, brushing past the guards and disappearing back into the night before they could ask more questions. Aurelia's city square was a grand plaza by day, lined with arcades and shaded by potted trees. Past midnight, it was a place of hollow silence. Even the decorative fountains stood still, their water supply cut to conserve resources since caravans had been attacked in recent weeks. The old textile warehouse loomed at the far end, one of those imposing buildings that once bustled with trade but had been repurposed for storing the dead and dying when tragedy struck. Sirene slipped inside through a side entrance. A single lantern glowed in the gloom, revealing rows of crude wooden tables. Bodies lay atop them like grotesque offerings. Some had sheets draped over them, others were too mangled to bother covering. She inhaled through her mouth to block the stench that hung in the air. "Identify yourself," came a voice. She turned to see a stout woman with tired eyes, a physician or coroner perhaps. "I'm Seren. I need to examine these. City guards sent me." The woman folded her arms. "Another vigilante? Your sort usually come too late. But fine, examine away. These poor souls deserve some justice." Moving down the line of tables, Seren fought down the knot twisting in her gut. The first few bodies bore gruesome but almost familiar signs. Throats ripped out, presumably by something with fangs. But the deeper she looked, the more she noted that the blood vessels around the wounds were blackened, as if infected by a fast-acting poison. Another body's eyes had melted, leaving only scorched sockets. She'd never encountered a demon or undead that left so many distinct forms of mutilation. This was methodical, as if multiple types of atrocities had been committed, or multiple entities were at work. Near the end of the row, she paused. One corpse showed signs of advanced decomposition, far more than any normal timeline would suggest. Its flesh appeared half-rotted, though it was presumably killed less than 2 nights ago. She pried open the victim's stiff jaw. A foul stench rose, and she swore she glimpsed the faint stain of runes etched on the tongue. Runes that glowed a dull red before flickering out. Necromantic runes. Possibly some twisted symbol connected to ancient cults. She let the body's head drop gently. She stepped back, thinking. Aurelia, while old, was hardly known for cult activity. Most arcane traditions had died out or been outlawed. That knowledge only deepened her unease. Something was orchestrating this from the shadows, and it was powerful enough to chain or fuse different dark practices. Steadying herself, she left the warehouse. She was not much for conversation or pity. Her entire life as a demon hunter had been about results. But this time, she sensed a magnitude that went beyond typical hunts. Perhaps it was time to find someone who could dig deeper into the lore behind these symbols. Across the city in the southern quarter, known for its scholars and artificers, Taryn worked by candlelight in a cramped study. Parchments lay strewn across the desk, covered in swirling script no one had deciphered in centuries. A small, battered chest lay open beside her, revealing a handful of earthen tablets etched with more of the same archaic writing. She gripped a quill with ink-stained fingers, brushing a lock of chestnut hair back from her eyes. Taryn was no warrior. She had only turned 23, fresh from an expedition to ruins beyond Aurelia's borders. With a mind hungry for hidden truths and an unflinching curiosity, she had earned a reputation among the city's academic circles. A few older scholars whispered she had a gift for connecting patterns in historical riddles. Those same scholars now shunned her, fearing that her research ventured too far into the domain of black magic. But that fear didn't stop Taryn. The tablets were too important to abandon. Her study was so silent, she could hear the scratching of her quill as she meticulously copied the shapes of runes from the largest fragment of clay. Everything had led her to these words. "When the sky bleeds twilight, the devourer's breath shall blow across the land, and no mortal shall be spared his hunger." She mouthed the phrase under her breath. The mention of a devourer had appeared in half-legends and scattered myths across ages, sometimes called Morthadeil. She found it again in scraps that alluded to a cataclysm that befell a fallen empire. The common thread, a prophecy of an eclipse or perpetual night that heralded this being's arrival. A knock on her door startled her from her work. It was a timid rap, but in the midst of her research about doom and ancient horrors, it felt thunderous. "Yes?" she called. The door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged archivist with a severe face. He stepped inside, giving a terse bow. "Apologies, but a messenger from the guard is here. There's been an escalation. They've requested your expertise to identify some markings on a victim." Markings? Odd runes carved into the body. And something about blood decay they can't explain. Taryn's heart sank. So the city's bizarre killings had something to do with the runes she was studying. She swallowed her unease. "Where is the messenger?" "Downstairs. He says it's urgent." She gathered her notes and the largest of the clay tablets, shoving them into a worn leather satchel. The archivist eyed her warily. "Are you certain you want to bring those? We don't know how dangerous this might be." "They're the key to unravelling what's happening in Aurelia," she replied firmly. "And if we don't understand it, we can't stop it." Seren stood in a deserted courtyard that reeked of stale fish and rotting vegetables. A half-broken statue of some forgotten hero lay toppled against a wall, its marble face smashed. She had come here to meet one of her contacts, a smuggler who made a living trafficking antiquities in and out of Aurelia. He had hinted at knowledge of a rising cult presence in the region, and she was more than willing to pay for information. Coin be damned. She waited, shifting her stance, scanning every corner. Her contact never showed. Instead, the night air brought with it a soft hiss, like the exhale of a beast waiting to pounce. Cautious, she drew her short swords, the steel reflecting the faint glow from a single overhead lantern. Something moved in the darkness beyond the courtyard's exit arch. A shape that slithered across the ground, then it vanished. Keeping her nerves taut, she approached the arch. A rancid smell, like sewage mixed with burnt meat, wafted from the gloom. She clenched her jaw. The hiss returned, louder now, followed by a wet gurgling noise. Two faintly glowing eyes peered at her from a crouched silhouette. As the figure emerged into the courtyard's weak light, Seren saw it was once a human, tall and lanky, but lumps of rotten flesh dangled from its arms. The face was half-eaten, revealing tendons and bone. Worst of all was the twisting black symbol burned into its chest, shaped like a jagged crown or spiked circle. She recognized it at once as a necromantic sigil. "Kyrian cult scum," she muttered, though the thing might not even understand. It lunged, limbs flailing with unnatural speed. Seren's swords crossed in front of her, deflecting the creature's downward slash. Another blow rattled her forearm. It was disturbingly strong despite its rotten frame. She pivoted and sliced across its torso. A hiss of decayed tissue parted under her blade. The creature stumbled back, letting out a shriek that pierced her skull. Seren seized her chance. She tossed the vial of purified ether. It shattered at the monster's feet, releasing a brief flash of blue-white energy. The creature howled, then collapsed, thrashing as if acid burned through its body. Panting, Seren stepped back, swords still raised. The abomination coughed out foul black ichor and tried to crawl toward her. She delivered a final thrust into its skull, silencing it. What in all the gods' names was that? She'd suspected a demon or a vampire, but this was more like a reanimated corpse possessed by runic magic. She thought of the twisted shapes burned into the murder victims. Whoever was behind this was no mere dabbler. She sank to one knee, searching the remains. Flaking bits of dried flesh tore away under her fingers. Beneath the gaping wound, she saw a brand that looked partially healed over. It glistened with an unnatural darkness, the same swirling pattern she'd encountered etched in runes back in the morgue. The only word that formed in her mind was Kyrian, an old rumour about a cult that worshipped a primordial demon. She'd heard bits and pieces during her training, but nothing concrete, only that they'd been wiped out or gone to ground years ago. Evidently they were back. She touched the brand, and an echo of cold power shot up her arm. She recoiled, cursing under her breath. This was no random isolated incident. If the Kyrians had infiltrated Aurelia, the city was in imminent danger. While Seren fought an undead horror in a forgotten courtyard, Taryn found herself in the flickering torchlight of Aurelia's guard post. The battered stone structure overlooked the city's main thoroughfare, though the street below was nearly deserted. The messenger who fetched her led her to a small side room reeking of antiseptics and fear. There, the city guard's captain, a tall woman with stern features,